This is a work of fiction. Any resemblance to real events or persons is purely coincidental. This story is purely fictional and does not promote or encourage any form of violence. That served two purposes. It discharged an emergency tracking signal just as it mapped the terrain with a flow of radar. When he led them to a point exactly 1/2 kilometer west of the downed transport, he took a position behind a cluster of rocks. Wrath stayed low but looked to the pilot. "What happened up there?" "I passed out when you went into dive to regain escape velocity. I can see the damage to the hull. What hit us?" The pilot answered honestly, albeit briefly, respecting Wrath more as a fellow than as a civilian. "Couldn't avoid a second missile. Ship wasn't made for those kind of maneuvers. Lucky we didn't get blown out of the sky." Obviously, Jack didn't like the open discussion. "No more talk." Wrath spoke clearly. "Jerk." The pilot just smiled. The transport was down, and they were in an emergency situation. The coordinator was no longer in charge. In this situation, verbal communications may be crucial to survival, the pilot said firmly. The other flight officer monitored his own portable. Motion detectors revealed more bad news. "We got company. Ground-based. On foot. Northwest. Less than 5 kilometers. But there's got to be close to 50 of them." The pilot gritted his teeth as he checked the time-lapse from his first transmitted distress signal. "Confirm your detection with station control. Get an exact fix on the position. Link with control established. Detection confirmed. They're exactly where I said they were." "Fenrights?" Wrath questioned aloud, but he answered himself. "Dumb question. Who else can it be?" The Authority pilot wanted more information. "Maintain that link with control. What's the status on our evac?" The second flight officer offered a statement of acknowledgement. "Melees in flight for pickup. ETA, 3 minutes standard." "Good. They'll get here first, but those Fenrights are going to be a little too close." The Authority officer looked over the fairly level surface of the desert. There were a few other rock formations for cover, but little else. "Let's persuade them to pull back." He set his sidearm for anti-personnel, raised it, and prepared to fire a time-charge projectile densely packed with razor blades. "Do not fire that weapon," Jack ordered fiercely. Years of obeying orders brought pause to the pilot, but the very situation created a willingness to proceed. He glared at the coordinator, who repeated himself. "Do not fire that weapon. You may think you don't have to follow my orders anymore, and that may or may not be true. But if you fire that weapon, I'll see you court-martialed." The pilot knew the situation, knew that leaving enemies so close to an evac zone was against all recognized procedures, but he also understood the pull of this man, and he lowered his weapon. Wrath could not believe his eyes. "Give me the blast weapon. I'll fire it." Jack still looked upon the Authority officer. "Holster your weapon," the pilot muttered, aloud, but holstered his weapon. "What?" Wrath groaned. "What the chaos are we supposed to do?" A distant rumble flowed through the air, and the second flight officer offered an explanation. "Melees are coming in fast. They're not risking being targeted. They're not going to slow for a vertical landing. They've already marked a runway. It's right between us and the shuttle. We should be out of here in less than 1 minute. Looks like we caught a break." The pilot spotted the 2 vessels coming in low from the southeast. "Cover your ears." Wrath didn't ask questions. He just did it. He never saw anything like it. The melees came in like lightning, and he thought they were going to kamikaze right into the desert ground, but they put down smooth and used their Boscon props to halt their phenomenal velocity. Still, before the props kicked in, the melees exceeded the speed of sound and a sonic boom nearly knocked Wrath to his back. The Authority pilot removed his hands from his ears and flashed a grin to Wrath. "Some cool landing, huh? Let's go." They took off into a full run, but as they got near the two landed melees, Jack issued one last order. He pointed to Wrath as he screamed at the pilot. "Take this man on that melee and return directly to the station." Wrath didn't care. He wanted away from this lunatic. The flight officers were also more than happy to cooperate. The three men ran away from Jack as if they just discovered he had leprosy. They leapt into the closest melee and signaled all clear. The melee took off with the same speed it landed. Props exerted excruciating force as the vessel screamed forward in a runway takeoff. In a mere instant, the small craft flashed toward the upper atmosphere. Jack moved alone to the second melee. He jumped through the hatch and ordered immediate takeoff, but to remain within weapons range of the downed transport. A section colonel sat in the pilot's chair and did not respond to the coordinator's orders. He guided the melee to emergency evac, but once in the air, he remained in formation with the first melee. As the melee headed toward atmospheric escape, the coordinator was far from pleased. "Didn't you hear me, Colonel?" Jack growled. The gray-haired officer aired his own understanding in a very matter-of-fact tone. "I don't see any stars on your collar. I take orders from my group commander and the station general. That's about it. Give me that blast headset, Colonel." Jack did not wait for a reply. He ripped the apparatus off the officer's head and yelled into the transmitter, knowing full well that the message would reach the station general's command post. "General Hollins, this is Lassonelli. I want that downed transport disintegrated. Do you understand me? Order this idiot to return to the landing site and destroy that ship with enough firepower so that not a trace remains." He did not wait for a response. He handed the set back to the colonel and watched with impatience. The colonel moved slowly, deliberately. He carefully wiped the headset with his hands and placed it gently upon his head. After listening to a reply, he sighed heavily. Jack would not leave well enough alone. "I got another news brief for you, Colonel. You just lost your wings." The colonel put a heavy hand to the flight controls and the melee pitched suddenly. The quick lurch set Jack sprawling to the floor. "Just following orders, sir," the colonel responded in a similar monotone voice. "Expediting our return to the landing site." The colonel made no further theatrics with the rest of his actions. With deft precision, he speared the melee downward through the sky and back to the position of the abandoned transport. He quickly targeted the downed vessel with two Slagman-guided projectiles. Slagmans were designed more for space combat than for planetary engagement. Their shape and propulsion source were contrived for a windless, zero-gravity environment. The colonel had other choices, as the vessel was engagement-ready and equipped to offer powerful responses to most any threat. As well as Slagmans, the melee carried Hawk and Javelin missiles, more appropriate weaponry for firing within a planet's atmosphere, but Slagmans carried the punch to cripple a star carrier. Even a near miss would do the job. The colonel fired. A short rumble acknowledged that the guided projectiles were away, and the melee began a quick ascent. Slivers of lasers maintained communication links between the melee target computer and the guidance system of the Slagmans. The colonel watched his weapons board as the ordnance continued its downward trek to the desert floor. The guided projectiles fought against the wind currents to keep their target. They wavered and grumbled throughout their flight, but they both found their mark. The colonel radioed his observations back to station command. "Detonation confirmed. Target destroyed." Jack was not as quick with an assumption. "I want a flyby confirmation, Colonel. I want to see for myself." "We're ordered back to... Do you want to be court-martialed as well as grounded?" "I didn't think so." "Take us down." Jack took a quick seat before the Colonel could maneuver the ship out from under him again. "Son of..." The Colonel broke off. The melee soared in at high velocity. The Colonel was well aware of the Fenrite's defenses, which knocked out the transport, as well as the nuclear missiles. The melee was far more maneuverable and much faster than both, and he intended to use this advantage. Once near the surface, he approached at a skimming altitude, low enough to avoid Fenrite targeting radar. He brought the nose of the melee directly toward the landing site of the downed transport. Nothing was left but two large craters. Probably every circuit of the transport was annihilated into single atoms. "Visual attainment of target," the Colonel remarked more to his headset than to his passenger, but he spoke loud enough for Jack to hear. "Target destroyed." Jack stretched his neck to look over the Colonel's shoulder and see for himself. "Return us to the station and tell them to have a new portable ready for me when we land." The Colonel gritted his teeth, but forwarded the request before he landed. The Fenrites that had been closing in on the downed ship were knocked over by the earlier sonic boom of the landing melees, which evacuated Wrath and Jack. After that, they proceeded with caution. They still hoped to inspect the abandoned craft to learn more of its secrets, but they now knew of the terrible destructive power of the enemy. They would not simply rush towards the craft, no matter how many secrets it held. Such discretion saved their lives. When they heard the melee return, they moved away from the transport with heady fear. They weren't certain if they could avoid oblivion. Surely no Fenrite in the nuclear-destroyed city eluded vaporization. Still, they ran with the desire for self-preservation. They dove to nearby cover, and they witnessed more of the humans' destructive power from behind heavy rocks. The Slagmans were unmistakable in appearance, fighting the air currents and wafting through the air like uneven spears. The Fenrites swallowed fear as they witnessed the guided projectiles, turning the transport into dust. A few suffered sight disorientation and flash burns from the bright explosion, and others took some small cuts and bruises from flying debris, but none were injured seriously. No more Fenrites would die at the hands of the humans. At least, not this day. Jack nearly ripped the new portable out of the waiting supply officer's hands. He signed nothing, ignored everyone else around him. He moved like an angry bull directly to the station general's command post. Once in sight of the general, he paused. He put his full attention upon his portable, reconfiguring the security passcodes. He entered a few notes while shaking his head. Finally, he looked up to the general. General Hollins was none too pleased himself. Jack didn't care. "Don't even think about giving me a lecture on authority courtesy, General. I don't have the time. If you really have a bone to pick with me, you have 20 minutes to write a report on my behavior. You can seal it and have an aide carry it as an escort with me back to Regency Govern, because that's where I'm going. As for now, I want several things. I want the fastest vessel you have ready for departure in those same 20 minutes. I also want you to recall all vessels and keep them docked in this station," the general remarked, with cold malice of his own. "Do you really think you can order me around on my own station? No, I can't order you to do anything, but I'm making a request, a serious request. One way or the other, I will meet with Regency Govern. They're going to hear what I have to say, and like I said, you can make your own complaint about me directly to them." The general still spoke as if he maintained power over the conversation. "Fine. I've already recalled all melees, and you can bet your ass I'll be sending a protest to Govern on your behavior. I'm going to have both a ship and a messenger ready in 15 minutes. I suggest you be ready, because it's taking off and not waiting the extra 5 minutes for you." "Whatever," Jack grunted. "And where's that blast explorer, Scampion? I want him off this station and out of this system." The general almost laughed, and he did not hide his amusement. "Hey, he's your problem. He was supposed to be off this station weeks ago. You were the one that kept him here." "Good. Then I'm giving him authority to take off and evacuate the system. As for any other unauthorized ships that enter this system, I suggest you destroy them immediately." "Right kind of you to repeat orders I've had for over a month now. I think it's time you got off my bridge." Jack just grunted, turned his back, and stepped away from the general's post. Wrath had his gear in his hand as Jack entered his quarters. "Deja vu, huh? Well, you can forget about ordering me to stay now, pal. I'm gone." "Blast right, you're gone," Jack snarled. "You have 10 minutes. I only need 2, asshole. I know where my ship is, and I'm on my way." Jack held up a hand. "Just one thing I want you to take with you. You don't talk about what happened here to anyone. We've got a mess on our hands, and if you start a panic with what you think you've seen here, we're going to come after you. Remember, while you've been here, you've been on the authorities' payroll, and we have the records to prove it. That carries with it a great deal of responsibility. Leaking information will be considered treason and espionage. You're no longer an independent, mister. So think about that before you go shooting your mouth off." Wrath pushed by the coordinator and headed to his ship. "I just want out." 9. Lies, the trip through space, dissolved like sugar in the rain. Wrath slept peacefully through most of it, and when he landed on the Janus cargo ship pads, he felt refreshed. The new stabilizers on Wrath's Explorer made atmospheric entry nearly a pleasure. And it was good to see some familiar sights, good to be away from the tensions on the Authority planning station. As if guided by a grudging sense of responsibility, Wrath decided to make an immediate visit to Lars' warehouse. It had been a long time since the middleman left the Fenrir system to return to his business. Wrath wondered how much Lar would hold against him, expected at the very least a cold response. He was thankful, as well as surprised, to see that Lar welcomed him first with astonishment, and then with a huge smile. "Wrath, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." The middleman offered the Explorer a hand. "You've been gone a long time. I mean a long time. I was wondering if they had put you away on some penal planet. I just couldn't believe they were going to forget you wanted to retrieving those emeralds." "Who, me?" Wrath laughed. "I'm an honest explorer, remember? Yeah. How could I forget? So really, what have you been doing with yourself all this time?" Lar looked a bit sheepish, but asked the question anyway. "Did you have some time to do?" "No. No penal planet. I've just been working with the Authority. It was a good deal while it lasted, so I thought I'd milk it for as long as possible." Wrath was relieved to receive the cordial greeting, but he couldn't hide a twinge of guilt. "Seriously now, I'm sorry I got you into all of that. I should have known better." Lar waved it off. "Things happen. What am I supposed to do? Cry about it?" "Yeah, but you were gone a long time too. Don't for a minute think I didn't know that when we were cooped up together. It meant lost business. Is there a way I can make it up?" "They really must have paid you well." But Lar shook his head. "The Authority more than compensated me for the lost time. They probably gave me more than I would have made had I been operating all that time. They also gave me first crack at major contracts until I got back on my feet again. I didn't suffer. In fact, I probably made more money these past few months than I ever have." "But you wouldn't want to go through it again, right?" Wrath asked laughingly. "You got that right. Once was interesting, but once was enough." Wrath's eyes instinctively scanned the room. Though apparently alone, He still lowered his voice. He could still remember Jack's expression when the coordinator advised him to keep quiet. But this was Lar, who had seen the alien. He didn't see harm in revealing information to the middleman. In fact, he felt almost obligated. Not as interesting as after you left. You should have seen some of the stuff out there, especially the last few days. I tell you. The middleman didn't let Wrath continue. Lar's demeanor turned gray with dissent. I don't want you to tell me, Lar stated hard and fast. I don't want to know any more than I do. I don't want to start up anything new. And I don't need anything else bottled up inside of me. You have no idea how hard it's been not to be able to tell anybody about what we saw. Every time I'm about ready to slip, I remember what that Jack guy said about it being classified. I got a few reminders of that in the beginning and a few new ones just a few weeks ago. I don't need any other stories keeping me up at night. Wrath held up his hands, as if surrendering. You're right. You're right. I guess I just want to talk about it too, but we're not supposed to. So I'll try to keep you from any more trouble. He paused and reconsidered how he should put his next question. I'm not asking you anything out of the ordinary if I want to know how much the public knows about this, am I? Lar frowned. I guess not. Have you been checking the comms? Every now and then, but I try not to do it any more than the average curious Joe. What are they saying? Normal stuff. Know-it-alls blathering on about nonsense they know nothing about. It's all guesses and made-up stories. Bottom line is that the Regency Bureau of Information distributed a notice that a possible finding has been made by one of the exploratory councils. They said in order to protect the integrity of the finding and to allow the councils to do their job, they are keeping most of the information classified. Of course, the media immediately went up in arms. I guess they would. Were they able to force any more information out? Actually, it seems they were. They forced a press conference with the head of the General Exploratory Council. In some heated exchanges, the council head admitted it was a finding of alien life. There it was again, alien life. The explorer had seen the Fenrites up close. He had been on the authority station that scanned and surveyed every Fenrite activity. He had been shot down by the alien defenses. Still, the mention of alien life bothered him. The thought that something else existed on that planet before he landed pressed on his own reasoning. Something didn't fit, but it simply evaded him. Now, however, news of the Fenrites was apparently being spread across the Regency population. Then, I guess it's out. The explorer capitulated. We've got aliens. We're not alone. I guess everyone is talking about meeting these things, huh? The media's probably distributing pictures. Hardly. Regency Govern has determined that the alien organism has rights of its own, and these rights supersede the rights of the media. They want them protected, and that's been a debate all in itself. The location is still classified, but you wouldn't believe how good some of these hackers are. With all the authority activity going on all over the galaxy, they've actually narrowed it down to 3 possible systems. Do they have the right one? Yup. Then someone's going to try and break in. Apparently a few already have, but it hasn't helped narrow down the possibilities. There's a record of a pilot captured in all 3 systems, and in each case the pilot has been held by the authority on charges of conspiracy. No one's been able to get in, make a scan, and get out, so no one other than the authority and the councils know which system it is. Except for us, Wrath added. Lar didn't appear thrilled with that thought. Yeah, except for us. That's why I don't like talking about it. Don't worry too much. If there's this much pressure on the council to release information, I'm sure what we know will be general knowledge in a few weeks. Wrath decided to quickly change the topic. So what else is going on? Not much. Business is good, like I said. How are the prices of emeralds doing? Still a hot commodity. I hear they've actually made a prototype of the new engine. But the authorities got it under wraps. They don't want to make it available to public yet. And speaking of emeralds, are you going to bring me some more soon? I need some scouts to do business with. I've got more buyers than suppliers, and I'm always on back order. Rath sighed. I don't know, I guess so. I want to retire, but I don't think I can. Not yet, anyway. I do have a good amount on deposit to fall back on. That's the first time I've had that luxury in a while. And you should see the nice new Explorer I have. Lar shook his head, but smiled for his friend. All because you wanted to raiders. Some emeralds. I guess crime does pay. I never thought of it like that, Rath admitted. I guess I am better off than when I started. Reception advised Dr. Sinclair of her guest's arrival. She looked at her calendar again and grunted with great disapproval. He was late, by several days Earth standard. This never would have happened before, but she guessed her ouster from the Alien Research Council allowed others to think they could treat her with less respect. And what could she do about it? Regency had all but removed her power. Why would a coordinator of Jack's status concern himself with an ousted scientist? She sat in her office with a sour frown. She debated whether or not to return the favor, keep him waiting in the outside hall like he kept her waiting. It was childish, vindictive, but somewhat enticing, a final charade or a last grasp at control. She decided against it. He might not wait, might simply drop off a note. He probably only arrived out of professional courtesy. There was no other explanation. He didn't need her influence anymore. She didn't have any. She really didn't even expect a personal visit. All she needed was the final report, notification that the experiment concluded successfully. She was waiting for the classified release when the orbiting control station relayed a message that a transport had come out of Boscon Push with the coordinator on board. That actually caught her off guard. She asked for him to be shown in. I must say, I never expected to see you again. I simply expected a note. Her tone slipped, made her irritation obvious. A note I expected days ago. Jack sat down heavily and waved a disgusted hand. We don't have time for that. I did not send the release because the experiment is far from concluded. Dr. Sinclair's eyes widened only slightly at first, then narrowed in an almost accusatory stare. Excuse me. The Fenrites are still around. The doctor shook off her surprise as her eyes glistened and her face turned red. Her anger grew as she made her own assumptions before hearing the facts. She clenched a fist almost viciously. Regency Govern changed their plans and they didn't notify me. They want to keep the Fenrites around. They're going to continue, not without me. I want back on that council. You go tell. He cut her off as abruptly as he entered. Govern didn't change their plans. The Fenrites changed things for them. They shot down the missiles. What? This time she couldn't just shake off her surprise. She watched Jack with a dumbfounded expression. That's right. The mission was a complete failure. Jack's narrow head tilted to one side. When he raised his eyebrows to express his own astonishment, he appeared more animated than real. The Fenrites defeated an entire authority assault, shot down almost every missile. Quite a dramatic event, really. I would never have guessed they would have built so many defenses. They had almost complete coverage of their entire planet. Only 2 of our missiles got through to their targets. Severe damage to one city. I surveyed the damage myself to make sure. They suffered setbacks in production and population, but not enough to wipe them out. I assure you, they're still there. Sinclair sat quiet, reflecting on this new information. A good deal of this is my fault, Jack said without a note of sorrow. I should have been more forceful with other suggestions. Our main priority should have been to remove the Fenrites. Secondary concerns should not have been treated as important as they were. Dr. Sinclair finally recovered from her shock, but she still had many questions. What secondary concerns? I thought the main objective was to destroy the Fenrites. It was, but another agenda reared up as well. No one wanted to risk a public relations disaster. Everyone wanted to be ready with an answer for what happened to the Fenrites, and no one wanted to take responsibility. Even Govern accepted the plan. Simple truth is that the authority was too worried about making it look like the Fenrites obliterated themselves. They used the wrong weaponry. Stupid. They should have just gone down there and blasted them with particle beams and XM bombs. It would have taken longer, but we would have gotten the job done. Are they considering that now? Jack released an irritated sigh. Not likely. There's a bit of a power struggle going on between the authority and certain council members, even with Regency Govern. I'm afraid I'm at the heart of that as well. The idiot station general feels I insulted him and questioned his individual command. He's not about to simply follow the recommendations of any civilian council. He's even called in the authority's top leaders in an effort to restrict interference from non-military personnel. I'm afraid that's going to cause a long delay. Meanwhile, I see no reason why the Fenrites won't continue to advance. Dr. Sinclair paused to consider this heavy news, nodded as options played out in her mind. Options that might now reverse her current direction toward uselessness. She played the card that seemed to offer the best chance at recovering some of her previous power. That's the question that should be answered, Sinclair said with great conviction. We still don't know why they have moved forward with such acceleration. As far as I'm concerned, that is the heart of all our problems. I agree. I also believe it's dangerous to let the Fenrites examine or even see any of our own creations. I relayed these concerns to Regency Govern. In this matter, they have received cooperation from the authority. No one wants to risk further failure. So for the moment there will be no more attack on Fenrir. There will also be no atmospheric reconnaissance. There's even going to be a reduction of scans. Our observations will be strictly visual with no wave patterns, no particle beams, nothing the Fenrites can detect. The subtleties of such a situation were not lost upon the doctor. Then we're in a holding pattern, essentially maintaining the status quo. But we'll still be watching them. That's correct. Sinclair thumped a pudgy fist down on her desktop. And the Fenrites still exist, and they still need to be studied, and if that's the case, I want my old position back. No one is more qualified to lead this investigation. Jack was quick with his response. You're not going back to that council. Under my assertions, a new council has been created. A council to deal with the Fenrite problem. He held up a hand to keep her from interrupting. This council will have unlimited resources and will report directly to Regency Govern. It will not be subservient to any other general council, not the exploratory council, and not even the authority. This council will not officially exist. The general Regency public will have no awareness of its duties or its members. This is the council you will chair. Her face crinkled, and despite the power she now had in her grasp, she decided to gain some vengeance. I see. Regency is now crawling back to me. How can you all be so sure I will be so willing to come to your aid? Elizabeth, please. Remember who you're talking to. Do you really think for a moment I am going to believe you won't take this post, or that you would have me walk out of here and hand this seat over to one of your critics? Sinclair leaned back in her chair. She eyed the coordinator with suspicion, but in the end she nodded with acceptance. Her demeanor changed instantly, as if she had emerged from a cocoon. The thought of such power, chairing a council to deal with the Fenrites, to act without the chains of other councils, with the veils of secrecy. It renewed her vigor, her personal desires. Her thoughts swam in hundreds of directions. She considered potential peers to join her and which critics to omit, of possible studies, and the ultimate purpose of such an endeavor. Jack returned to the more mundane of their problems. This is not going to be as easy as you might expect. We have literally hundreds of possible leaks and loopholes, from the technicians that scanned the planet during development, to the pilots that fired the nuclear weapons. The pilots are the authorities' problem, Sinclair noted, almost oblivious to the potential pitfalls of such a decree. Jack quickly reminded her of the tense relationship between the numerous councils and the military. The authority is currently in direct opposition to Regency Govern. They do not want this handed over to another council. They will resist that. They'll want to cover their own ass. That's what this is about. As for the pilots, the authority selected individuals that understood the nature of this situation. I truly doubt they're afraid they'll reveal anything. It's more than that, but I'll accept that the pilots are less of a threat than the technicians. That is a potential problem, Sinclair agreed. We've removed their reward of studying the Fenrites. We have to offer them something of equal value and make them understand it is in their best interest to cooperate. You have to accomplish this without letting them know this new council exists, Jack advised. We also cannot depend on immediate assistance from the authority's security and spy personnel. That means we have to find other resources to maintain security. Let me remind you that there were close to 300 techs aboard the planning station. There are another 57 council members of various assemblies that are aware of the truth behind Fenrir. You think council members may be a threat? Jack did not hesitate. Until I named you as the chair of this new council, I considered you a threat. She raised an eyebrow. Really? Absolutely. Your work was gone and you had nothing left to do. I doubt full retirement would have pleased you. You would have grown restless. And what were you going to do about it? It was my hope that you would have been offered a position on the General Exploratory Council. Nothing of specific interest, but enough to keep you busy. Regency Govern agreed, and the offer was forthcoming. Until this little change, of course. Why wasn't that offered immediately? She asked with some displeasure. Some members of Govern wanted to see you punished. They thought a period on inactivity was called for, and they didn't want you to think of this as a reward for what they still think is a terrible mistake. The mistake was made by the idiot geneticists, if I had my way. Jack grinned and reminded her of the new situation. Now you do have your way. You will choose how to identify and rectify these mistakes. But we still have to consider the possible snares. I agree the authority will take care of their own, even if they are currently at odds with the councils. There's a station general that would probably spill his guts to get even with me, but he's already been reassigned. Punished like me, huh? Hardly. He was rewarded with a new post in a very active location, lots of marauders and lots of problems. That's what he wanted. He has full fleet command authority and doesn't have to deal with the likes of me. Interesting tactic. Nothing less than you intend to do with the research technicians. I believe these are all problems we can handle. As long as we remain attentive to the details, we'll be fine. But we still have that one nagging problem that seems to keep coming back to us. The explorer, Scampion. He wasn't very cooperative in the last few days. The doctor actually grunted. I don't see why that should be my problem. Like it or not, he's part of the whole package. Can I leave him up to you? The coordinator hid a smile, but he jumped at the request. If that's what you decide, you have the funding and clearance to do whatever you wish on all matters involving the Fenrites. That includes Wrath Scampion. The credits in Wrath's account, courtesy of the authority payroll, allowed him some time to relax. Janus certainly wasn't a pleasure garden, but there were enough taverns and betting palaces to keep him occupied for a few months. He won a little to start, but when his luck turned bad, he stopped gambling. He enjoyed the break, tried to forget about Fenrir, but that just wasn't possible. He accepted the fact that this little piece of history was going to nag at him for quite a while, perhaps the rest of his life. After another few months of meandering about with nothing much to do, he turned his attention back to the explorer bids. He still had his ship, and it was something to do. He also remembered a pledge to Lar, a promise to continue his scouting and to use Lar exclusively as his middleman. And why not? He owed Lar at least that much. Looking through the bids wasn't as bad as he remembered. It was kind of hard for him to admit, but he wanted to go out again, especially now. He had the kind of ship which would allow him to make bids to most any star system, and he wouldn't have to face the same rigors of atmospheric entry. He thought about his new explorer and how he obtained it. He also considered what Lar had said about the whole ordeal, about crime actually paying. He didn't get what he originally wanted, but maybe he did come out ahead. He wondered if he would do it again. He had a new explorer and a good deal of funds on account. What was the downside? Dealing with Jack. That wasn't pleasant. But that was over, and here he was back on Janus and perhaps even looking forward to making explorer bids. But would he do it again? He just didn't know. Before making his actual proposals, Wrath returned to the cargo ship pads and his own ship. He wanted to gauge current fuel prices, landing fees, and maintenance costs before calculating a half-dozen bids. He tracked down a maintenance robot with an input device. He laser-cabled his portable to the current price list. No real changes. The cost for maintenance nagged at him, like something pinching at the back of his neck. It wasn't that it was high. It just left him scratching his head. He walked away and toward his explorer. He'd let the advanced onboard computer do multi-calculations for several bids, rather than watch his portable struggle with the load. Once in his cockpit, he downloaded a bid program from his portable, as well as the costs he obtained from the maintenance robot. He linked his explorer to the complementary quote computer on the pad in order to determine potential revenues for different loads. Emeralds still demanded outrageously high bids and continued to climb. Again, he thought of Fenrir, of the emeralds he had left behind. Fenrites probably don't even know how much money they have down there, he grumbled. The thought of the mineral deposits on Fenrir bothered him as well. A good deal like the maintenance bothered him. For some reason, he kept thinking of a big jigsaw puzzle, and he was being handed a bunch of little pieces. He stared at a monitor as the computer calculated possible revenues against flight costs. The result was obvious. If he could find a planet with easily accessible emeralds, he could basically bid 3 to 4 times below cost. The markup on the scavenge would pay for everything, and then some. Problem was, no one could be sure which planet harbored which minerals. There might be emerald deposits, but they may be too far beneath the surface or too scattered. You just couldn't be sure unless you got within the atmosphere and did a surface scan. Like a scan he did on Fenrir. He froze. His memory was as clear as if it were happening right in front of him. He did scan Fenrir. He scanned it when he tried to decide what to scavenge. He found the pockets of rubies and emeralds near the surface. His ship also picked up reserves of gold far beneath the crust. He wasn't scanning with a narrow beam. His sensors were working on a planetary scale. His old ship had been in contact with both orbital probes in flight and submersibles in the water. There was nothing wrong with his scanner controls during his initial explorer of Fenrir. Everything was fine. Otherwise, he never would have found the mineral deposits. He linked to the maintenance history logs under his name. They were still there, including the last maintenance check done by the robots right here on Janus, completed right after he came back from his first explorer of Fenrir. He scanned the report of the cockpit controls. Diagnostics were completed on all functions. Sensor controls were functional. Blast it! They lied. 10. New direction. Sinclair looked over those gathered about her with a smugness that exuded her self-exoneration. Her critics, nowhere in sight. She selected each member of this new council, rewarded those that remained loyal. And though she considered these scientists and researchers friends and allies, she took control with an iron hand and a will to match. You all know the importance of everything we do from this moment on. We are in control of the Fenrite problem. Make no mistake about it, although there will be rumors of debate over this issue. The authority is currently taking a hard stance over Fenrir. They're not happy with the results of their assault. They are locking heads with Govern itself over how it should be handled. In the end, however, it is up to us to deal with the Fenrites, to find the solutions to the problems they create. Still, we must view this as an opportunity as much as a problem to be solved. We have questions to answer and objectives to meet. The ultimate goal is to remove the Fenrites as a threat. In my estimation, that means determining what made them a threat in the first place. Let us follow the trail from the very beginning. This experiment started as a study of the evolution and development of a species and a civilization. Somewhere along the way, that focus was ripped from us due to the unexpected speed of Fenrite advancement. That was the first mistake. The first order of business is to return part of our study to the development of the Fenrites, both technological and sociological. I want 2 questions answered. First, why did they become a global society without internal strife? Within that context, I want to know who the leaders of the Fenrites are, how they came to power, and what drives these individuals of the species. Second, I want to know how they advanced so quickly. It is nearly incomprehensible that they could have developed the mining abilities, the manufacturing base, and the technological advancement to reach their current levels of production, to say nothing of their defense abilities. This particular point is extremely important because it constitutes the heart, the true threat. If we understand what has propelled the Fenrites, we create options for dealing with them beyond simply blowing them out of existence. Without answering this question, we have no true options. In essence, we must now comprehend the incomprehensible. With a snap of her finger, the original documentation of the Fenrite project appeared on all terminals. She would not mention names directly, but she would not dance around the subject of blame. The responsibility of this particular problem lies with the geneticists. They created this species through the alteration of DNA strands. They were unable to answer even the most basic questions as to what might have allowed the Fenrites to develop so quickly. This is no longer tolerable. Lizards and gorillas don't just start advancing through technological barriers, production restraints, and infrastructure obstacles as if they were suddenly turned into magic genies. Something happened during the alteration process, and I demand answers. Therefore, I want the process duplicated. I want a small colony of Fenrites created exactly as they were created before. This time, however, there will be control. We're going to place an experimental colony in a pre-constructed environment, a biosphere on Earth's moon. We're going to watch them as if we were studying any other animal. This should have been done months ago. She stopped to gather her thoughts and peruse the directives she had listed on her own portable. We cannot, however, ignore the potential threat of the Fenrites while we analyze this control group. as the authority remains at odds with govern, future conflicts with Fenrir remain a strong possibility. In that vein, I want this council prepared to make recommendations. If we do come to a point where Fenrir must be attacked, I want it done on terms to our liking. We cannot afford another failure. Therefore, I want the first assault analyzed to every last order. I want to know exactly what happened, why the vast majority of our missiles were shot down, and why 2 got through. I want damage and rebuilding estimations. More importantly, I want a surefire strategy on how to deal with the Fenrites successfully. But we must also keep in mind future study of the planet and possible backlash from public opinion. Keep in mind that any assault strategy will be a plan of last recourse, but I want one ready. 1. Sinclair immediately began bestowing responsibilities to the different members of the new council. She spoke as if there would be no debate. Her word was law. Once finished with the main missions, she turned to ancillary matters. Understanding the Fenrites and determining how to deal with them is only the beginning of our study. We have other objectives as well. We must consider the possibility of a security breach. What has happened and what will happen must stay in this room. Only that which we determine acceptable public knowledge will be distributed to the media, and only after we analyze all possible interpretations. There will be no unauthorized contacts with the media or the interstellar comms. That means everyone with knowledge of our previous endeavor is a possible risk. I want every single tech with knowledge of the Fenrites accounted for. I want them watched, and I want extensive reports evaluating each as a potential risk. I want the same done for this list of 57 council members. One leak is unacceptable. She transferred the list to the individual portables linked to the council network. Many of the members eyed the register of names with hesitancy. These were not simple administrators or low-level techs. These were individuals of high standing and of great power within Regency. Sinclair, however, treated them all with disregard to their jurisdiction or authority. Security is an important measure. I want control procedures in effect. Plans designed not only to maintain the secrecy of this council, but to protect all matters of the Fenrites. From gentle nudges to outright threats, I want every tech and every council member with knowledge of the experiment to understand the depth of our dilemma. And I want the media watched as well. I want the comms scoured. Every opinion and every article must be analyzed. I want answers prepared for any theories. I want shills and agents spread throughout the galaxy, ready to dispute anything that may jeopardize our security. At this point, the public has its own opinions about what is going on. They believe we have discovered an alien, and now it's time to leak additional information. There will be no official disclosures, but additional reports should be leaked right now. Let the public truly accept that an alien has been discovered, but this alien is now considered warlike, with battles occurring on their home planet. There is to be no identification of Fenrir. I want that to remain a mystery, but it should state that the alien has engaged in major warfare. Let's get the public understanding, as quickly as possible, that this alien is not something they want to meet. We also can't keep tabs on all the scans in every star system. Someone might have caught the nuclear explosions with a lucky scan. I want to be able to explain 12 different ways to Sunday on how anything that happens with the Fenrites is their own doing. We have unlimited resources. Let's utilize them. All situations are to be covered. She heaved a heavy sigh, revealing her dislike for the next topic. But as she understood Regency politics, she could not afford to ignore the authority. I also want liaisons with the authority. Not an official coordinator of this particular council, but an individual with an understanding of our concerns and with established ties to the current leadership staff. The intention here is to reduce stress between the authority and the councils. I want them working for us again, No more threats, no more power struggles. We will have weekly progress meetings, but not to the point where they interfere with our objectives. If you cannot attend, courier a report, but keep me up to date. If I begin to question the progress of an area, you will not be able to avoid me. Now, let's get started. Wrath walked into Lar's warehouse with a big smile. He moved as if he didn't have a trouble in the world, as relaxed as if stopping by to just say hello. He paused to take a look around, crooked his neck to peer into the back bays, but the absence of any customers did not change his demeanor. He slapped a hand on the counter. The thump rattled the desktop and slightly startled Lar, but the explorer spoke with the same carefree smile. "Nobody here? Good. I want to talk to you about some quotes. I'm trying to make a decision on which planets to bid. There's a lot out there to choose from, but I've got some questions. I know the price on emeralds is still high, but I'd like to know what's been going on with some of the other gems. I can get current quotes, but I don't know how the prices have fluctuated over the last few weeks. I figure I should talk to an expert." Lar looked at the explorer as if he had smoke coming out of his ears. Wrath never asked him about quotes before a bid, only after he already returned with a shipment. "What?" Wrath didn't let him continue. "Let's not do it here," the explorer said, plain enough. "Close up for a few minutes and let's get something to eat. I'm buying acknowledgement of my good fortune, and maybe to ease a little of that guilt for what I caused you." He said it so innocently, it sounded like he truly meant it. Lar looked at his watch and shrugged. He didn't know what kind of information he could offer that would help Wrath choose a planet, but he was hungry enough to eat. If Wrath wanted to buy him a meal, he'd be happy to take a break. Fine. Wrath showed no sign of hurry or anxiety. He waited patiently for Lar to shut down the terminals and lock up the storefront. But once they walked on lonely streets below the hum of skimmercraft, his tone and expression changed as if pressed by a gust of Arctic wind. He looked around again, but this time with nervous apprehension, wary of any passing strangers. When he was sure they were alone, he spoke in a cold whisper. "You have to know this. I owe it to you, so don't argue." Lar blinked at the change in manner, felt more than a little uneasy. He caught himself looking over his own shoulder, then questioned the sense of alarm. "Argue about what? I don't even know what you're talking about." "I know you don't, but I don't want you to cut me off in the middle. You have to listen to the whole story. If you don't, I won't forgive myself." The explorer steadied himself as he grunted the revelation. "They lied about the Fenrites. They lied about me missing them. They weren't there. Not during my first explorer, anyway. I can't honestly tell you I know what's going on, but I know one thing. Nothing alive was on the planet. No plants, and no Fenrites. Fenrir was as barren as I thought it was when I made my initial explorer. And don't doubt it, because I'm sure." Lar just buried his face toward the ground as he kept walking. He wasn't going to stop, wasn't about to take this conversation into some public place. For whatever reason, Wrath felt the urge to talk like this. It would be in the streets, alone, where no one could watch or hear. He figured that's why Wrath wanted them out of his warehouse in the first place. "This isn't some kind of excuse on my part," Wrath assured. "I'm not making this up because I think I look bad. I don't care if I missed them or not, but I didn't miss them because they weren't there." "But we saw them," Lar pleaded. He wanted to end this discussion as quickly as possible. Wrath might have been fixated on missing the Fenrites, but he didn't care. He wanted to end this contention now. "Remember, we went down together. You, me, and that Jack guy. We landed exactly as you landed, and we didn't spot any Fenrites. I didn't think there was anything there either. It wasn't until we went back up and went looking for them that we actually saw anything." Wrath grunted with a sense of disgust as well as disapproval. "Yeah, I know all about A great choreographed move on their part, but it's just part of the show. We landed in the desert and there was nothing but rock. Just like when I landed. Makes perfect sense. Convince us that we think nothing is there, and then show us the alien. Makes everybody think that it was easy for me to miss them. But that's just not the whole story. That's just what we see. It's not what really determines the scouting of the planet. The sensors do that. The landing just explained why I had no visual contact, but the shipboard sensors do the full job. Lar jumped right back with another explanation. There was a control malfunction, a problem with your explorer. You had a narrow beam. The middleman stopped, held his breath as a cargo ship pilot walked by. When the stranger disappeared into a nearby tavern, Lar continued with a lowered voice, but with greater determination. Your scanners weren't working. You didn't get a reading of the Fenrites when I was with you, but we both know they were there. Yeah, I know. Problem with the controls, that's bull. My guess is that they set that up. Lar let a heavy sigh of frustration escape his lips, and Wrath felt a sense of urgency to explain, to convince the middleman. Look, you may not believe this, but you haven't heard everything yet. Just stick with me. Everything I'm saying is easy to explain. If they wanted to mess with my controls, they had the opportunity. While I was under the custody of the health techs, they had all the access to my explorer they needed to set it up so the beam would narrow, even though it was set on wide scan. Why? To convince us there was a problem with the scanners. That's why they brought you and me on that little ride back to the planet. They weren't checking a theory. They were setting us up, trying to make us believe that the controls were broke all the time. Lar couldn't keep up. He couldn't understand what Jack was trying to say, or why he was saying it. But they were broke. They didn't pick up the Fenrites even though we saw them. We went in low. I saw them myself. Your sensors didn't pick them up until you turned control over to the computer. That was the second time, Wrath insisted. Not the first time. Not when I was alone. I'm betting those bastards adjusted the controls before we took our ride. Made it look like that was the true cause. Then they took my ship so I couldn't test the sensors myself to see what they did. If you can't test this, how can you be so sure it wasn't really broke? Because I just took a look at the maintenance schedule at the cargo ship pads. I had the robots do a full maintenance check of both my explorer and the cargo ship before I went out to Fenrir the second time. That was immediately after I came back from my first explorer of Fenrir. There was no indication of a problem with the scanner controls. They found other problems with other controls. Nothing severe, but little things that they listed on a repair suggestion docket. So if the sensors passed maintenance check, that means they were working during my first scan of Fenrir, when I was alone, before anyone else had access to my explorer. I downloaded a copy of both the docket and the system check into my portable. Want to see it? Lar waved a hand in refusal. I believe you, but couldn't there be another explanation? What if the controls were just starting to go bad? You know, flickering on and off. I'm not an engineer or a repair tech, but I know these dumb things go on and offline as easily as a buyer changes his mind. Geez, the terminals in my office seem to be working fine one day, then they go on the blink. Not for long, sometimes just for a minute or two. I bring in a tech, and I get funny looks after he tells me they're working perfectly. The same thing could have happened with your scanners. Wrath nodded. I thought about that, and I had to admit it as a possibility, until I considered something else that's been bothering me. Did I or did I not come back with a load of rubies and emeralds? Lar paused for a moment, as he did not follow the purpose of the question. Finally, he spoke the obvious. You did. But what has that got? How did I find them? I don't know, Lar admitted with a fluster. Wraith accented the truth, like a prosecutor nailing home a verdict of guilty. I scanned the planet, nearly the whole blast surface. If my sensors were on a narrow pattern, I would have been scanning for a month before I could have got the information I needed. Think about it. I'm an explorer, but I don't make anything from the explorer bid. I make my money from selling what I can scavenge. But I've got limited cargo space. Don't you think I'm going to make sure I find the most valuable resource before I commit to a load? I found sources of all kinds of metals, including gold, as well as gems like the rubies and emeralds. That was no narrow pattern. How long do you think it would have taken me to scan the planet and find all of that with a beam covering just 20 square kilometers? That's absurd, and you know it. Lar fell silent. Wrath wasn't the only explorer with which he had business dealings. He knew how they operated, knew that their true source of income came from finding and scavenging the right resources. He also knew Wrath had come back with a full load of both rubies and emeralds. How could he have found both with just a narrow band? He would have known right then had there been a problem with the scanners. Think about it, Wrath pressed. It all fits. Look at this coordinator, Jack. Think about everything he did. He once called himself a manipulator. That's what he did to us. It's so blast clear. He set us up every step of the way. He took us on that little joyride just to explain why I didn't find the Fenrites on my first explorer. He wanted to convince us, because if he did that, he could convince anyone. But the truth is that I was able to scan the whole planet. I found the emeralds, but I didn't find any life signs. How is that possible? It's because the aliens weren't there, and if Jack lied about the Fenrites, that means he could have lied about everything. Wrath watched with a wave of relief as Lar grudgingly accepted what he now knew as fact. Lar, however, held to his doubts. If not to the facts, then at least to the motives. Why would they do such a thing? Wrath was ready for this question. I was the first person on Fenrir. I was there before the Fenrites. He had to convince me I missed them. And you were the person I sold the emeralds to. It had nothing to do with my plans to retrieve or retrieving anything. I had the explorer bid. They had to find a way to shut me up. I guess they could have just kept me in prison. But that would have raised suspicions. I think they wanted me around in case anyone had questions about the first explorer. I had the bid rights, and that's public knowledge. You gotta figure some media investigator would check once word got out that it was Fenrir with the aliens. But why? Lar implored. Why would they have to go through this elaborate fabricated narrative? What's the reason for making it look like you missed them? I've been asking myself that same question, Wrath admitted. I keep coming back to one thing. The Fenrites weren't there when I got there. That means they showed up afterwards. Like they're colonizing worlds just like us. Maybe that's what they're afraid of. They want to keep that a secret. Why would they be worried about that? I don't know, Wrath frowned. Maybe they don't want to start a panic. It didn't add up for Lar, and he kept throwing his skepticisms out like old garbage. Then why admit that they even exist? Why bring us to Fenrir and then let us go? Why did the chair of the General Exploratory Council admit to the media that the aliens exist in the first place? That doesn't make sense, not to me. You don't admit to something if you're trying to cover it up. None of this makes sense. Wrath threw up his hands. I can't answer any of that. I can only guess about their reasons. I'm just sure that the Fenrites weren't there when I first scouted the planet. Now they want me to believe they were. That's a simple fact, and it means something's wrong. That's what I had to tell you. Lar sighed unhappily. His thoughts swam in several confused directions. Why? Wrath responded with equal distaste. Because I don't know what to do. I know this is a problem, and I'm worried it's going to come back and bite me on the ass. I don't know what I'm going to decide, but I know if I run off, I just can't leave you in the dark. Sometimes it's better to be in the dark, Lar said, almost wishfully. Sometimes you get in trouble for knowing too much. Roth shook his head, pointed out another truth which to him was now just as obvious. And sometimes you get in trouble for not knowing enough. Lar didn't get a chance to argue further. A small commotion interrupted the debate. Nothing major, just a few shuttle jockeys running into a nearby bar. Lar heard one of them speak up about a media cast. The middleman didn't really care about any breaking news, but he actually welcomed the distraction. He wanted to stop thinking about the Fenrites, and he suggested they take a moment to see what was happening. Roth shrugged, but followed Lar inside the dimly lit establishment. Not very crowded. Someone was turning down the background music, while someone else was turning up the media report. Everyone peered into the deep crystal cylinder chamber which captured three-dimensional images of a live media cast. The broadcaster spoke from a prepared statement. MediaCorp has uncovered new information regarding the recently discovered alien race. Warring factions on the aliens' homeworld have engaged in nuclear warfare. Damage was reported to be high as several powerful warheads detonated over alien cities. The Council stresses that there is no threat to Regency or the general population. But now, more than ever, the alien discovery must be handled with the utmost care. Researchers will continue to observe the situation, and the authority is maintaining a presence to protect the security of Regency interests. No one was available for further comment. Roth just stared into the screen. Lar shook his head as some of the shuttle pilots began to debate the issue. This was not the kind of distraction he wanted. He looked to Roth with an almost accusing eye. "Did you know about this?" Roth didn't respond. Lar was not happy and would have raised his voice had he not wanted to be overheard. "What the chaos is going on?" "I don't know," Roth admitted. He couldn't understand why the Council would allow the release of this kind of news. He wondered if this was the same event which he witnessed, or if there had been a new exchange. Either way, it wouldn't explain why they would allow this to go public. Everything was supposed to be classified. Everything was supposed to be guarded for the sake of Regency security. Isn't that what Jack told him? He was threatened with charges of espionage if he spoke to the media. It was supposed to have been kept quiet, and if it was the same one he witnessed, then why exaggerate? Only 2 nuclear missiles detonated on the planet, hardly several. Was there another exchange after he left? Did the authority try to stop it again? And of course there was the matter of his own discovery that the Fenrites weren't on Fenrir when he first scouted the planet. All the information spiraled out of control, left him scratching for answers. "I honestly don't know what's going on. Let's just get out of here," Lar muttered, but turned and marched angrily back outside. He didn't wait for Roth. He moved quickly in a direction back to his warehouse. Wraith ran after him. "Look, I don't know what to say, but..." Lar cut him off. "I don't think I want to hear anymore." Roth didn't argue the point further. He did what he wanted to do, what he felt he needed to do. He told Lar of what he found. Beyond that, he was confused, and right now it felt like every man for himself. He confessed his own options. "I'm leaving. I can't say I know what's going on, but I'm not going to wait around for a hammer to fall on my head." "What?" Lar whirled around and asked with a near snarl. "You think someone's after you now?" "Maybe. Things aren't adding up, and I'm right in the middle of it. Right now, I'm a potential thorn in their side. They're not going to just let me waltz around. Don't you think you're overacting a bit? I mean, even if you do think you know something, as long as you stay quiet, what is it you have to worry about? Everything and anything. What am I supposed to do here? Just go back to scouting? The only explorer bid I'm going to win is a ride to nowhere. I'm done here." "Whatever," Lar stated flatly, tired of everything that was going on. "Hey, I'm serious," Wrath shot back. "I got nowhere to go. The only thing I got is what I can hold against them, and I have to figure out a way to use it." "And how are you going to do that? Who's going to believe you?" "I don't know if I believe you anymore. To anyone else, you're just one more nut who thinks he knows something about the alien." "I've got enough to prove my story," Wrath insisted. "I've got my original Explorer bid. That stands for something. I also have the maintenance check on my Explorer and the bill of sales for the emeralds and rubies." "I'll thank you to leave me out of this from now on," Lar demanded. Wrath bit his lip. "No promises. You're the one who bought the stones, but I'll do what I can to hide your identity. I'll get a copy of the unloading and transfer documents from the launch pad. That's actually more official documentation, real proof that I did return with a payload from Fenrir. It's enough for me to bargain with, and that's what I need." Lar just turned away. He had enough, and he simply didn't want any more. "Good luck. I'll assume I won't be hearing from you again." 11. Testing on the moon, Dr. Sinclair shuffled across the stark white floors of the cloning lab. "How many Fenrites are you creating?" Dr. Julios Farmer answered, almost evasively. "Around 30. Sinclair was not happy. "How many exactly?" 27. 20. Her reply was sudden, like an instant clap of disapproving thunder. "Why such a small number?" Farmer hemmed and hawed, but eventually he revealed the truth. "Two reasons, really. I'm not so sure it's a good idea to mass-produce the Fenrites and place a large colony on the moon. We have our own moon bases, and it would be unfortunate to have another problem. You let me worry about potential problems," Sinclair reprimanded. "But if it makes you feel better, I have considered the potential hazards of a Fenrite colony on the moon. I don't care how many Fenrites you create. I'm not about to let them become a threat to anything else up there. If they do, we'll eliminate them with 6 different poison gases. The sphere will also be charged with explosives. They won't get out. Not alive, anyway. Now, what's the second reason?" Farmer grunted at these rather hostile reassurances as he revealed his other concern. "On Fenrir, the Fenrites displayed amazing reproductive capabilities. I don't know if it was the lizard portion of their genetic map, but their population grew at a staggering rate. I want to try and analyze such growth within our controlled environment. If I keep the number low, I can watch the mating patterns more closely. I can also keep better track of gestation and growth cycles. After all, this is a major component of the Fenrite mystery. They managed to grow from numerous yet staggered and identifiable colonies to a mass planetary population. I still don't know how that was possible." The thought held merit, but Sinclair was not quite satisfied. "We studied that during the first phase of the Fenrite project. I thought our researchers had most of those questions answered." "Theories only," Farmer countered. "There was indeed confirmation of multiple births and short gestation periods, but I still don't believe that explains the dramatic population increase in full. I've used computer simulations to try and make the initial colony numbers meet the current estimated Fenrir population. In my mind, the numbers don't add up. Unless the offspring were immediately having offspring of their own, there must be something we're missing. Maybe the males are also conceiving somehow, I don't know. That's why I wish to keep the moon-based colony sole at first. At 27 total Fenrites, 11 females and 16 males, I can accurately determine all factors of population growth. If we start out with a larger figure, my data will be skewed. I don't want that to happen." "I see." Sinclair heaved a heavy, dissatisfied breath. "I'm not sure that's as important a factor as some of the other variables. Determining why they advance technologically is the major concern. If we hamper them with a low population count, we may never understand how they were able to advance so quickly. Your focus may be misplaced." Here, Dr. Farmer's confidence grew. I considered that, and I am prepared to handle such a setback. If the colony does not grow in size quickly, and this seems to hamper their progress, I will initiate 2 new adjustments. I will immediately clone additional Fenrights. I will also stimulate their technological progress by introducing invention that the Fenrights made on their own. Give them a little nudge in the right direction, so to speak. Won't that in itself jeopardize the findings of this experiment? Sinclair asked dubiously. We want to see why the Fenrights have advanced so quickly on their own. We didn't provide Fenrir with little devices for them to study. That's true, but I'm hoping it won't come to that. Sinclair moved her large frame slowly around the cloning lab. She crumpled her forehead into a mass of folded lines as she struggled with the issue. She was about to order Farmer to increase the number of Fenrights immediately, but she bit her tongue. I'm going to give you what you want, but I'm going to get what I want as well, she finally announced. I'm going to order a second biosphere constructed. One sphere will have the limited numbers you wish for your study. The other will hold the much larger number. It shouldn't take that much time. The first sphere is being constructed to house 5 to 6 separate colonies. The one you need can be significantly smaller. Is that acceptable? Dr. Farmer nodded almost happily. Quite, and the larger moon biosphere, constructed to house several Fenrite colonies, received the first collection of cryo-chambers. Transport techs injected each Fenrite encased in a frozen capsule with tranquilizers before resurrecting them from the cold. They placed the Fenrights upon the ground in a manner similar to the procedure enacted on Fenrir. All transporters and scientists, cryo-chambers, and resuscitating equipment. All signs of human existence were removed before the sedatives wore off. The researchers left nothing within the biosphere other than the plant life, which was an exact replica of Fenrir's own ecosystem. The new colony of aliens was left alone within this large, translucent half-sphere. But they were now constantly observed, carefully and continuously watched. The monitors at Earth-Moon Observation Fenrite, EMOF, covered every moment of inception. The sphere itself was constructed not just to replicate the environment on Fenrir, but to facilitate the full reach of surveillance. Every event was recorded and examined by dozens of researchers. Of the Fenrite subjects placed here, some were deposited in large gatherings, others in small groups, and a few were completely isolated. The process of following each Fenrite from its moment of consciousness was covered with painstaking detail. The researchers at EMOF would take no chance in missing the key link to discovering the Fenrite's accelerated advancement. Within the sphere, the true moment of inception came at the first fluttering of a Fenrite eyelid. Slowly, the Fenrites began to show signs of waking. A few grunted. Some rolled about while others rubbed their eyes. More attention was placed on this moment of so-called birth than had been previously performed at the moment of inception back on Fenrir. Scientists studied every move of the Fenrites, how they awakened, how they stirred upon the ground, and how they finally rose to their feet. The focus never waned. 2 moments were of vital interest. The first communication between individuals and the ultimate gathering of the main colony. 2 of the first subjects to rise carried themselves with apparent curiosity. They first examined their own bodies, scanning their arms and legs and feeling their heads. Once satisfying this seemingly common ritual, they began to focus on the others. They moved about the grass-covered grounds as they inspected those that still languished in partial sedation. When these 2 fully awake members finally came face to face, they simply stopped. They both, 2 females, appeared to struggle for long moments. Amazingly, one spoke a simple yet strange greeting to the other. "Good harvest" was the phrase given. They spoke in New English, the accepted language of Regency. The researchers knew the Fenrites used New English. It was the monitored communication from Fenrir. But they never expected to see this test sample develop the words so quickly. The two continued to communicate. It was rough at first, as if they had to struggle to remember every other word, but still a stunning development. Other members of the new Fenrite colony joined the conversation. It was as difficult as it was entrancing for the scientists to study. The communications were labored and slow, an engagement to find a word or phrase, but they continued, and the Fenrites displayed an amazing patience. Adding to the intrigue, the isolated stragglers and some of the smaller parties joined the larger group and entered the conversation with similar adeptness of language. No one was treated as a stranger or invader. As this joint meeting unfolded, the Fenrites discussed their immediate food and water sources, the need to explore the land. They spoke of building shelters and cultivating the soil with an intuitive understanding for survival. There was a general acceptance of their surroundings as well as their situation, and little time was lost on discussing their sudden existence. They selected a leader almost out of necessity, and the process appeared good-willed and effortless, as if they knew who was best suited to organize them. The gatherings of all Fenrites, whether in large groups or in smaller parties, took on an almost logical path. They addressed immediate needs as if they had all been trained in basic survival. In each case, the meetings took but one strange turn, a moment when they all made a reference to finding the true mother. Not a single Fenrite gave further explanation. The Fenrites seemed to know who this mother was, and the importance in discovering the entity was understood by all. Much of the same happened in the second, smaller biosphere. The 27 Fenrites woke, began communicating and quickly working together. A reference was also made to the true mother, though again, no further description was given. After inception in both spheres, Dr. Sinclair called for an immediate meeting. A screened transport with a handful of SPL field agents. SPL is the security and information gathering branch of Regency, departed from the propelled planning station with a landing curtain in full generation. It was the one thing both the Authority and Regency govern could agree upon, though the Authority was not informed that the request came from Dr. Sinclair's Fenrite Discovery Council. Everyone had questions, and SPL field agents mastered the training and controlled the means to obtain the answers. The craft took a low-profile approach, keeping the system's sun directly at its tail as it entered Fenrir's atmosphere. It dove to the surface with lightning speed, leveling off at treetop level. The landing curtain remained in full coverage throughout the journey, as SPL agents dropped to several locations upon Fenrir soil. The transport never invoked its Boscon props, relying instead upon ancillary engines and gravitational flying techniques to reduce the craft's signature. Such careful procedures were normally not applied, but the agents moved with a care generated by the unknown. While observation posts at the planning station pinpointed surface radar facilities, intelligence on other means of Fenrite detection and surveillance remained limited. The station receptacles failed to record other wave patterns emanating from Fenrir, but such an absence didn't mean that the Fenrites were without the technology to spot airborne craft. With such accelerated advancement, it would not be unreasonable to assume they might have made major breakthroughs in other techniques. From spectrum enhancement to wave displacement and particle disturbance, the use of such technology might detect the wake of the transport and threaten the mission as well as the lives of the agents. Such a threat forced careful measures. Considering the Fenrites a threat became a necessity. They already displayed missile capability and a willingness to engage. Now that they had suffered the loss of an entire city, it was not unreasonable to assume they might be working feverishly to invent and employ new methods of surveillance. Given their speed of advancement, expecting the impossible became standard procedure, and if the Fenrites could indeed detect incoming ships, it was considered a definite possibility they would assault. With such considerations at the forefront of a reconnaissance mission, over a dozen SPL agents moved on foot toward pre-coordinated observations points with full surveillance gear. Some worked in pairs, others alone. Star Jerrings stalked her path without a partner. She moved from her desert landing point to a pre-located hollow in a nearby rock formation. A small Fenrite settlement that had developed into a complex industrial park was her main target. She would not approach at dusk, but just after midnight local Fenrite time. As the transport could not facilitate optimal landing times for all operatives, it remained the agent's responsibility to remain hidden until the proper time of reconnaissance. A planetary surface scan performed by the planning station revealed the hollow, and no Fenrite life signs were detected in the area. It would conceal her for the few hours necessary before she could begin her independent mission. Star took all necessary precautions upon making her drop sight. As she made her way to the hollow, she activated an independent curtain, not so much a cloak of invisibility, but more a personal field of wave static. She crossed the hard rock surface of this desolate area in an all-out sprint, remaining crouched over like a hunting cat. She slowed only upon reaching her initial destination. 2 sandstone monuments marked her cover point. Ages of wind had pressed opposing rock collections together and compacted sand into a hardened sculpture that looked like the back of a double-humped camel. Below the crevices and between the rock bulges waited the hollow. As animal life other than the Fenrites was never introduced to this planet, Star did not have to worry about disturbing a desert snake or poisonous lizard, but her training kept her from simply diving into an unknown hole. Her caution revealed a surprise. She peered into the opening among the rocks and saw not a simple hollow, but a long ascending path which led to darkness. She flattened herself against the sandstone, but maintained a position just outside the breach. She took a small glow stick and carefully scattered the darkness about the very edges of the cave-like entrance. It was supposed to be a small cavity, large enough to fit several humans, not a deep cave as it appeared. Maintaining silence, she moved into the opening, opting to explore this unanticipated finding rather than abort the mission. She waited in pure stillness, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dark as she eliminated ding. The light from the glow stick. The fading sunlight drifted into the cave, and her widening pupils allowed her to scan farther down the path. She moved forward, slowly, carefully, but inspecting the sides of the rock with her hands. The opening section of the cave was smooth and natural, but deeper within the crevice, the rock revealed scars and uneven markings. The tunnel was not formed by the presence of wind or water battering the insides of the original hollow, but by manufactured forces, tools of the Fenrites. Star considered the discovery for but a moment. Her main objective, to survey the industrial park to the northeast, remained paramount to supplementary issues. It held information that could not be ignored. The authority needed to know the defense capabilities of the Fenrites, including their manufacturing base. Still, she had several hours before her original mission could commence, creating an opportunity to explore this tunnel without delaying her main objective, but she could not break transmission silence to gain higher approval. In the end, it was her call, and she decided to explore the tunnel. Sinclair had new questions, pressing questions, and she was abrupt with her demands. What the chaos happened in that biosphere, and don't give me any flippant responses. This is not the time for humor. I want to know how they were able to communicate so quickly." She looked harshly upon the man in charge, her expectations clear. She would not accept indecision or uncertainty. "Dr. Farmer?" The geneticist did not hesitate. In all honesty, it shouldn't have been that easy. But we already have one plausible explanation. As the Fenrites had no other opportunity for development, we must go back to their very creation. It is here where the answers must lie. In response to Sinclair's impatient glare, he quickly ordered the retrieval of data pertaining to Fenrite conception. During the cloning process, we instilled the Fenrites with the knowledge of basic agriculture. That was done for both the new moon-based colonies as well as the original Fenrites placed on their home world. Most of the information was in the form of illustrations. We didn't try to tell them what do. The brainwave infusion was meant to show them how to grow food in an efficient manner. This was done with a collection of images, pictures for the mind to recollect through memory cells in the brain. It was impossible, however, to eliminate all references of our own language from the knowledge transfer. If we did, we would have jeopardized the importance of communication. Just as knowledge of agriculture was implanted in their memory cells, portions of our language were infused as well. I believe that the Fenrites are drawing upon those references to recall our own language. The panel of researchers hummed in agreement. "It really does make sense," Farmer continued. "The first greeting contained a direct reference to harvest. That in itself is an obvious link. We see that they struggle to find the proper words. That is also an important clue. They are searching their own memory, but they have no memory, only what we implanted through the brainwave infusion. We may not have intended to give them a working knowledge of our complete language to start, but looking back at our procedures, I believe that was inevitable. We had even addressed this in an earlier meeting before the first Fenrir project. No one had an objection to the Fenrites using New English. There were some concerns about jeopardizing the secrecy of our actions, but in all, everyone was most enthused about the Fenrites speaking our language. In all honesty, this should have been expected. Sinclair was far from happy. I'm not arguing about them using New English. I am concerned about the speed in which they have gained proficiency. We did not implant brainwave or memory knowledge of our language. They were not given the type of intelligence or the instinct modification to fully understand New English, yet they only showed limited difficulty in developing full communications. I want to know how they adopted it so quickly. That continues to be the question. Why is it that they are able to do everything in an accelerated fashion? Farmer frowned, but he attempted to describe his own beliefs. He folded his hands in front of his lips as he tried to organize his own thoughts. I'm not so sure this is an accelerated process. Under these circumstances, using the technology and the genetic patterns we chose, we were simply bound to create this kind of aberration. At least I think so. We know gorillas have their own form of communicating. It is instinctive. It came with their genes. It is still in the Fenrites. We expanded their brain capacity, both for the moon colonies and for those upon Fenrir itself. Our intention was to establish an organism that would pass as an alien with the ability to grow. Now take all the factors and combine them. The inherent ability to communicate, the expanded intelligence, and the knowledge infusion with references to our own language. So this wasn't their own development? Sinclair questioned sternly. They didn't have to rely on advancement because we gave them this ability. That's my belief. Dr. Farmer started tapping his fingers together. Actually, though this in itself may not indicate a discovery process, it may help to explain part of the accelerated advancement back on Fenrir. With no language barrier, the Fenrites had one less obstacle to overcome. That in itself can't explain everything, but it is a start. Other researchers agreed, pointing to Earth's history of thousands of languages and dialects. Sinclair huffed. For the most part, she was satisfied, even enthused about this theory. It offered a working assumption for explaining part of the Fenright's accelerated development. It did not, however, answer all of the questions which arose from the moon colony inception. Well then, can you tell me who is this mother they keep talking about? Farmer just shook his head. That I can't answer. Hot air drifted up from the steep-angled tunnel, warmer than the winds coming off the cooling desert just outside the camel-humped rock formation. Air vent, Star murmured to herself. She checked her portable, both for elapsed time and electronic impulses. She still had several hours before she needed to return to the tunnel exit and begin her primary mission. Time enough to explore more of the tunnel. As for scanning wave patterns, there was a definite trace of slight radiation, like the emissions of older model terminal screens. There was also an electronic pulse equivalent to microchip discharge, definitely the signs of an underground communications or command center. Travel through the tunnel was not easy. It was not a path created for access, but instead a crudely dug ventilation passage to allow air circulation. In truth, its existence offered its own puzzle. Advanced underground command centers normally did not have such unrefined ventilation systems, but this is exactly what she discovered. She made quick recordings of her findings, and again she detected weighting contradictions. There were mainframe computers of ancient design, working in concert with microprocessors that rivaled the efficiency of her own portable. Vacuum tubes covered an entire wall of confused electronics, just as deftly architected silicon chips controlled highly sophisticated guidance systems. A pile of punch cards almost brought a cynical laugh to her lips, until she spied a laser cable uplink. The entire scene was a pure illustration of inconsistencies, containing signs more of a fabricated narrative than of any true finding. Star, however, understood the Fenright development. They were moving so fast in technology invention, they did not have time to keep all the facilities updated with the most current advances. She wondered how many more incompatible designs she would find when she reconned the manufacturing center. Unfortunately, she would never get the chance to carry out her main objective. Her portable flashed yellow with motion detection below her and to the right. She froze in the tunnel, still entrenched enough in the vent to remain concealed. Two Fenright sentries, dressed in what amounted to 16th century armor, only the metal was lighter and more flexible, appeared upon the ground below. They seemed to be transfixed with their own computer, something similar to one of the bulkier laptop models of the late 20th century, but they showed definite signs of concern and alertness. They traversed the area in a spread pattern, peering behind corners and searching the crevices behind massive equipment. The creatures were slightly shorter in stature than the average human. They spoke in coarse tones, but they spoke in a language she could understand. "False alarm?" one asked the other. The Fenright holding the laptop shook his head. No, something was here. Crows in the wheat. Crows in the wheat, the first agreed. Star bit her lip. She knew the Fenrights had never seen a crow. Birds were not introduced to Fenrir. She also knew that the cloned Fenrights were instilled with basic agricultural knowledge. Crows in the wheat could mean only one thing: invaders. They knew she was there. She checked her position. She avoided their detection for the moment because they checked ground-level access points. Eventually, they would peer upwards. When they did, she wasn't deep enough in the shadows to elude their discovery. She also wasn't too pleased with what she could distinguish of the laptop. It was obviously a sensor of some sort, not quite a motion detector, more like a low-level scanner. It probably worked on the ability to detect heat. The airflow in the vent was masking her presence, but she knew that wouldn't last for long. One flux in the air temperature, and they'd know right where she was. She gauged the distance between her and the closest Fenrite. She had two choices: drop in the room and take them both out, or flee up the shaft. She didn't know how large this command center stretched, and didn't know the level of security. For now, there were but 2 sentries, but one had made a reference to an alarm. More might be on the way. She decided to flee rather than fight, hoping to avoid detection. If she was noticed, she would rely on her lead to reach the desert first and lose any followers in the darkness topside. She moved with great care, but her first motion set off another alarm. The Fenrite with the laptop could not localize the disturbance, but he called a warning to his partner. "The sky is red. The sky is red." The reference to coming storms forced the second sentry's attention to the ceiling. The female guard pointed to the shaft. "There." The Fenrite said nothing further. It bounded across the floor and leapt toward the air shaft. Star's lead quickly diminished. She bolted up the tunnel at full speed, but it remained a difficult climb as the shaft was steep and narrow. The Fenrite had no such difficulty. Its slightly smaller frame fit easily through the opening. Its inherent ability from the gorilla portion of its genes allowed it to handle the steep incline with much greater swiftness. In but a heartbeat, it had obtained a firm hold of Star's ankle. The strength of the Fenrite was surprising. The guard pulled fiercely, snapping Star's lower leg, and then dragging the SPL agent back down the vent. Star bit down on the pain, crushed a scream within her while she made one last attempt to free herself. Ignoring the anguish, she flipped herself downward, using the slope to accelerate her fall. She came down heavy on the Fenrite's back, but she simply bounced away and slammed against the shaft wall. This time she could not keep from screaming, but only for a moment. The sentry kept her hold on the agent's broken leg as she dropped from the ceiling vent. The Fenrite landed its feet, but Star was whipsawed downward. The agent's neck broke clean as her head crashed against the floor. Dr. Sinclair spoke through a secured channel to the new liaison between the councils and the authority. Aaron Skysdale did not approach his appointment like other coordinators. He was more of a fact-finder, a communicative link. That wasn't exactly what Sinclair had wanted out of a liaison. She had hoped for someone who might sway the authority generals back into a stance of cooperation, but she doubted that this was possible in the short term. Authority Command was being as obstinate as ever on this particular issue, and all commanding officers displayed a downright abhorrence to work with any council, even Regency govern. Skysdale had served in the Authority as a station sub-commander. It was not his duty to question orders, only to see that they were communicated to the proper personnel. For this, he had gained the trust of the highest-ranking officers within Authority Command, and Sinclair regarded this aspect of Skysdale's appointment as extremely important. If she couldn't get Authority to agree with the councils, at least she wanted to know what they were up to. Skysdale reported his findings in a casual manner, dropping the formal and respectful style he used when dealing with the military. It was a tone he learned to adopt when speaking to council members, an inflection that made everyone a little more relaxed. He found he liked his position, and he learned to adapt into the role of liaison. For his own purposes, and even his own curiosity, he wanted to get information from both sides. "They're not liking what they're finding out," he began rather pessimistically. Apparently the SPL agents got strong intelligence on a number of tech plants on Fenrir. Their progress doesn't seem to be slowing. In fact, It appears they've recovered parts of the spearheads that didn't detonate. They've got samples of our guidance chips, communication links, and fuel sources. No one's happy about that. Sinclair voiced her own disapproval. They should have realized that was a risk back before they decided to drop me from the council. I would have never made that mistake. Someone should be putting Jack Lassonelli up for a medal for having that transport destroyed before the Fenrites could get a hold of it. He was the only one that appeared to be thinking straight that day. I don't think we want to bring up that name right now, Skysdale interrupted. Many authority generals are still using his insolence as a reason for not cooperating with Govern. By the way, what's the word on Coordinator Lassonelli? Both Govern and the authority are concerned about this Wrath Scampion. According to all reports, he's a loose cannon. The authority wants to know how that's being handled. You never mind what's going on with Jack, Sinclair reprimanded. I've assigned him to take care of the problem with Scampion, and I'm sure he'll handle it. I want you to be concerned with what's going on at Fenrir and what's happening between Govern and the authority. What else did the agents learn? Skysdale hid his annoyance. He wanted that information from Sinclair. He had hoped to use it as a bargaining chip to learn a few of the more guarded authority plans. No one but SPL Security and Sinclair knew how the coordinator planned to take out the Explorer. But he knew others cared about it. It would have made his job easier. For now, he outlined what he was aware of back on Fenrir. SPL also got info on Fenrite leaders. More bad news. It's almost an apolitical society. There's no power struggle, no opposing political parties or factions. There are absolutely no restrictions in the form of political impasse. Every leader is simply chosen based on his or her ability to coordinate the most efficient use of their resources. That restricts SPL ability to use subterfuge and counteraction. If there's no rival faction to the group in power, there's no way to flame internal strife. They're all just one big, happy family. Sinclair's brow furrowed in frustration. You don't know how tired I am of hearing that. Why can't one of these sociological experts explain how that happened? Well, I know I can't. But there's one last bit of bad news you should know about. A few agents did not return to the pickup sites. The SPL director is none too happy about that either. He's in a difficult spot as it is. He's trying to keep everyone happy. The authority, Govern, even you. Well, I'm not happy, Sinclair ranted. And I don't give a blast which director is upset. Regency Govern has given this council unrestricted power. I hold the chair, which means I have unrestricted power. If he gives you any problems at all, make sure he knows I'll have him removed. He could side with the authority if I do that, Skysdale offered. I mean, I'll tell him whatever you want, but I think you want him on our side. Right now, he's holding his allegiance to Govern. He's allowing service requests to the authority out of standing practice. But if he starts getting annoyed with us, he could easily offer his agency's vast resources and information to the authority on a more permanent basis. That would not help us. What are you talking about? Some kind of coup? That's ridiculous. This is Regency, not some 2-bit past Earth government. I'm just letting you know what could happen. Espial is a unique agency. It reports to Govern, but in all